My name is Nicola Anthony and I'm a sculptor. I have art studios around the world. We're here today in my UK-based studio in Bishop Stortford in Hertfordshire. I also have a studio in Dublin, and I also have an art studio in Singapore where I used to live. My sculptures often take the form of text sculpture, which means that instead of using a line to create a swoop or a shape, I actually use a sentence. And sometimes instead of using colour or dots, I'm using letters. So creating shapes and images even with words, which will invite people to actually come in and look a bit closer at those stories. I find that as an artist, I can draw out those perhaps more vulnerable, more raw parts of people, which actually we all have in common, trying to foster connections and compassion between people. When I heard about the opportunity to create public sculpture in Wokingham Borough, I was really intrigued by the fact that the open call was very much about human stories. It was about the whole borough and bringing that together, and also a lot of thought about diversity and inclusivity, which is another real passion of mine. And that really just sparked my interest and got me inspired about how we could actually include a whole borough's story, which is quite a challenge, as part of one sculpture. So this one is one of the very first drawings I did, and it's obviously a bit more conceptual. It's more about the feeling of going through the arcs and the echoing of those curved shapes. Perhaps it might be the shadows or just the sense of going through this portal. This one is a bit different. It's a bit more of a literal translation, so using text to draw the actual. Pretty much that's the form that the arcs will take. So this one is quite close to what it should be. This was one of the original, just a quick mock-up of how it could physically go into space. I then started looking at, what would be the profile of each arc that goes over. Does that need to be rounded? Does it get wider at the base point? So these are just sort of quick mock-ups that I can make in clay or in wax. In a way, I feel like these are arcs which are above the ground, but there's a sense that they go below the ground as well. So this right here is the current final model of the sculpture, and this is what I pitched to Arts for Wokingham in the panel interview that I had. So. And then from this model, we then have to work out, do we need to tweak anything? Do we need to change the shape when we get on site? How do we really feel in that space? How do people flow around it? For this sculpture, because it's going to be owned by and for everyone in the borough, it is really important to me to make sure we've got all of the voices in there. So there is an online portal so that anybody, all public voices from the borough of Wokingham, can become part of this sculpture. But I find it really important in terms of inclusivity and also breaking down barriers for people who might feel a little bit shy to engage, or they might not feel like the opportunity is for them. So we've really specifically gone out to groups such as adults with learning difficulties, the blind and visually impaired community, and taken the workshops to them to make sure that their voices are captured as well. These are some examples of the stories that are collected. So as a kind of worksheet at the end of each workshop, and people have shared really very deeply, and that then that's now on the online archive. So people will be able to scroll through and read the stories. And then I have to do the really difficult job of deciding which stories get into the sculpture, and usually it's sort of fragments and snippets from people's stories. What people have said will be what goes in there, and I don't edit in terms of changing the meaning or changing the words. And when all of those stories go together, we get this kind of epic poem about humanity and what it is to be alive and what it is to exist in this moment. The stories for this sculpture will also be represented as a sound artwork, and that means that when you're near to the sculpture, or if you visit the website, you'll be able to hear the stories in spoken word. So that's a different way of engaging with it. Arts for Woking have been brilliant at enabling the creative process to happen and being very open to my ideas. And they're also very open to, really telling the real truth, which is important to me as an artist that it's not a sort of happy, cheesy slogan. It actually, if there's some parts in there which are about the more difficult and challenging bits of being a human being, then those will be going in as well. I think it's incredibly important to think about our public spaces and how we interact with them and what they mean to us. And there's actually a lot of science behind, our own well-being coming from the architecture and the objects and the artwork which is around us on a day-to-day basis. So it's important to me to think about how to make that space not generic and not just something that looks like other spaces all over the country, but something which is really individual and unique to Wokingham, and it speaks to the people who will be living with it every day. And perhaps it also tells visitors to the borough a story of the people who live there.